Thank you, Santrupt. Um, Thank you very much, NHRDN, for inviting me again, despite the torture and pain you went through the last time. But deeply honored. These end of the day sessions are tough, and like Santrup said, when you don't have any fixed agenda and you don't have a course to sort of cater to, it gets more tougher. I was just reminded that while Santrup was talking that there was a similar organization in Malaysia which very graciously asked me to speak on one of these evening sessions, and this is the second one, so I was dreading it. And in that session, I was told that please arrive at 7 o'clock, and the time was also similar, and please make a speech on ethics. So I said fine. When I entered the hall, I found it was empty, and I was told that the venue had been shifted to the bar. So in the bar, there were plenty of people who had gone through a whole day's program. And at the end of it, they were quite sozzled because they've been at it since 6 o'clock. And then, lo and behold, suddenly one Chinese guy appeared on stage, and I asked him, I said, is he the speaker before me? He said, no, he's Malaysia's best comedian. So I suffered about an hour of his comedy, which was extremely slapstick, by which time I got up to speak on a very serious subject of ethics. I had people who were inebriated, and at the same time, the comedian had made great success with his jokes. So today is a little different. Of course, I can see lots of sobriety around, and I'm grateful to everybody for that. It's a great honor for me to sit next to Santrupt. He's much younger than I am, but I have always held enormous respect for him, both personally and professionally. And I think in many ways he embodies those three characteristics that you have spoken about today. Pankaj, when you and I were having a chat, you mentioned, and just now also you mentioned that you spoke to several CEOs. And they turned around and said to you that we need courage, conviction, and all that. I think that's very prescriptive on the part of CEOs. And as Santrup rightly says, I can't think of anybody who works in a professional organization who should not carry those traits. And most of all, the CEO, because it is his responsibility to create an environment where people can display such characteristics. A couple of days ago, I was watching TED.com, and I can't somehow recall the name of the speaker, and he said something very interesting. He said he traveled to Bhutan in the 70s, and that's the time the previous ruler, Jigme Singye, took over. And he asked him in a candid interview, he said, what's your biggest agenda? How much are you trying to drive up the GDP of Bhutan? And he said, no, my biggest agenda is to drive up the gross national happiness. And in the course of that discussion, he asked the Home Minister, he said, how do you want to drive happiness? And he said, like, we are not driving happiness. We are in the job of creating an environment where people will be happy. And similarly, I think CEOs have jobs to create courage and conviction. I think pragmatically speaking, everybody wants to be courageous. Everybody has conviction. But the question is, why is it not exercised? A lot of it is not exercised, and that reminds me of another thing. Ishan, little girl from Harvard, she came and spoke to me the other day, and she said she wanted some tips. Sandip uncle, I'm setting up this place. We are training youngsters who are coming from the IITs to learn how to lead. They come from very, very modest homes. They haven't been trained. So how do we teach them? And I said, having been to business school myself, I think one of the things that business schools don't teach you as a subject, although they teach a lot about leadership, is how to deal with this ogre called your boss, which is the most important requirement in a job. Leading is easy. Sometimes you can pull ranks. People also listen to you. But how do you deal with the boss? I think the important characteristics for whether it's an HR person or a marketing person or anybody who has an idea or who has conviction and the courage is to also understand that in the pragmatic world, he must have the tact and diplomacy to be able to put across a very harsh point and put across a point of difference. That's a skill that is required more than sheer audacious courage. And that's the pragmatic way. I mean, we can keep talking about it till cows home. Somebody was saying that 90% of the CEOs when surveyed in the world said we were measuring all the wrong metrics in HR. Measuring productivity, this, that, etc. But we never measured, is our training effective? Are people happy doing their jobs? Is this something that brings out the best in them? We never measure those things. Yet 90% of the CEO says that should be measured. And only 5% are actually measuring them. So, there's a very famous Japanese philosopher, I'm reminded of the words where he said, very, very powerfully, he said, this is the end of history. So is this the end of traditional industrial management? Where somebody, it's not your boss, but some philosopher or some patriarch in industry about 50 years ago created measures that you're all measuring all the time and which is coming to you as hand-me-downs. The most important part is that I'm myself sitting in the cusp of a major change that's happening in my organization, which has been a traditionally strong industrial organization. Systems, processes, measurements, you almost dumb the human being by making everything robotic. That is suddenly having to deal with 20-somethings who are the so-called Gen X and Gen Y. And that's one of the competencies that we all need collectively, not the HR guy, how to bring out the best in the Gen X, Gen Y, and how do you make the twain meet, where at one end you have a 74-year-old veteran who has never failed in his engineering prowess, and a 20-something who's restless and who's defying every rule that you have created for him. And that's when it's important for people to be, and I think, and again, pick from what Santrupt said, everybody needs these competencies. The game has changed. Time durations have become shorter, and I remember the last time I was speaking, I said in the digital world, time has become asymmetric. It's no longer weeks, months, years, it's hours and minutes. Time spans have become shorter, changes have become faster. So it's like moving from a test match to a T20. A test match has batsmen who have roles to perform, positions to bat on. Bowlers don't know how to bat. But in T20s, everybody is an all-rounder. Because the time is short and things can fail. I'm sorry, it could be a bad analogy, but if I didn't give a cricket example, I wouldn't feel comfortable. So it's very interesting to see what are we measuring as an organization? What is our so-called GDP measure? And therefore, what competencies are required of this CHRO? I, being a CEO like Santrupt, have my 3 best friends in the company have always been the CHRO, the CFO, and the brand head. Not even the marketing head, the brand head. And it's because these 3 are very key elements of creating organization culture. And all 4 of them have to be aligned in the manner in which they exercise the rules, the symptoms, and the cures and the maladies for an organization. It's not about just the CHRO, it's a shared resource. But like Santrupt said, sometimes the CHRO is the man on the spot. He cannot talk to unions if he doesn't have the support of the CEO. He cannot go and make commitments that somebody else chickens out to support him. Why is it that the CEO always delegates the hard decisions to him? Even for very senior people. So I think there's a very major so-called jugalbandi that's required between the CEO and CHRO. And I think one of the world's finest CEOs have always been great CHRO. So I think when we are discussing in the corridor, I think, why is a CEO not a CHRO? I mean, why is he not a people's person? Why does he require the courage and conviction of the CHRO? Yes. Yeah.
All of that, they've given us. I know. Just tell me, you said, and very rightly, and I entirely agree, that it's for the CEO to create the climate. But if the CEO is not creating the climate, does the CHRO have a job to walk up to the CEO and say, hey, you're not creating the climate where people could speak out or express or whatever? Now, always the CHRO cannot wait for the CEO to create a climate. And the CEO, if he's not creating, it's also CHRO's job to go and talk to him about it, sensitize him about it. So what do you think about that?
No, absolutely. You see, the key operating word is trust. And trust comes from the confidence that two people have between themselves, in the fact that they have shared expertise. In my expression of the CEO creating the environment, I did not for a minute think that it was not the job of the CHRO to actually go and approach him and tell him where he's right or wrong. And it's not about today's times. If you see historically, some of the greatest CHROs who have been across the Indian firmament have been known for their courage of conviction. And they have earned the respect of their CEOs because they have had the audacity to shut the door and have a powwow with the CEO because they knew they were right. And they are the guiding light because the CEO is in a rarefied atmosphere. The CHRO is on the ground. He's touching, he's feeling, he's actually getting to hear the sounds. So both of them, like I said, it's a jugalbandi. And it's very critical.
I don't know what's your experience, and I'll tell you a little bit of my problem. Whenever there is that moment of truth comes in where I have to display courage, if I start thinking about it more, 99% chances will be that I'll walk away from it because there'll be a lot of rationalization will take over. Should I not? Have I understood the problem enough? Do I know enough? Should I be telling him now? Should I be telling him in this manner? Then finally all of that. The moment I stay with my instinct to say, well, my gut tells me this is not right and I need to discuss, and I go and talk about it, I'm able to. The moment I start thinking too much about it, I'm not able to. How does that work?
This morning I had an instance in the office. I'm sorry, I suddenly remembered that. And I was saying that why is it that when situations and problems confront us, when I'm saying us, I'm talking about the entire CXO community or the senior management of the organization, that people come to you with a set of problems and they set different proposals and you almost intuitively pick what seems to be the right thing. And you do it very quickly. And then you wonder whether you've been rash or have you just off the cuff and because should you have thought a little more. I'll give you another example. I've always found that which is very rare, which is when I go to buy a sari for my wife, that if I go into a shop because I like a certain color, and then I spend more time, I get completely confused, and I actually end up buying the same one after 1 hour.
The very fact that you thought of going and buying a sari for your wife itself is a sign of great courage. I wouldn't even have that courage.
No, the courage is when you shell out the money. So, I think because of our experience, because having been through things before, a very complex set of rationality and processes happen which we must recognize. That with age and experience, it comes intuitively to you. But actually a very complex set of
But do you with age become more courageous or less? I find the youngsters are far more courageous in expressing their views than the seasoned mature. We often create a defense in front of us saying, I'm being very mature. I think that's a rationalization to say I don't have the very guts to say something that I should be taking a position.
Very interesting question. I spoke about taking a decision. Not to take a decision is also a decision. So, which probably senior people do more often than not. But
You're absolutely right. When you are younger, it's again, I sort of talk about cricket. You play with gay abandon. And then as you start getting older and you have more and more experience, you start thinking a lot more. And that probably curbs some of your ability to, and then your stakeholders get different. And again, it's all a matter, like I keep saying, it's always a matter of keeping your environment. If your shareholder owners are brave and they are courageous, they want to change things, it will percolate down. It will go to the CEO, it will go to the CHRO. But if there are traditionalists who keep blocking your way all the time, and they are the majority, you have a long battle. So why don't we hear about some stories of courage, character, and confidence, or how you deal with, I'm sure in your own professional lives you deal with it, Nathan?
Just as you were speaking, I think it requires a lot of courage to go tell your boss that he is whatever that you want to tell him. And I think the times when you have to take an ethical call is the time when you are really faced with this huge thing. I like what you said, Santrupt, when you say you don't have to think too much. This is so much part of you as a character, as a professional. You can very much go and say what you have to. There are times when I have suffered the consequences, but it is fine. Because I know that one time I said something which was like, the emperor has no clothes kind of stuff. I paid a price, and I paid a very severe price. And in our profession, you know what that price is. And much later when that CEO ultimately left on and did something